geopolitics, it is a pattern of power, the rising and falling of nations, and the elements that make it happen. One element, of course, is military. One element is economic. One element is political. And one crucial element is technology, which we've been talking about today. Power creates technology. Power utilizes technology. And power is destroyed by technology. So one of the things you have to talk about when you talk about geopolitics is the rise and fall of technology. In 1972, I was a graduate student at Cornell and walked into the bookstore. And there was a Hewlett-Packard calculator selling for $300, which for a graduate student and anyone at that time was staggering. And that contained a microchip. And they said, that's really very important. And I said, yeah, right. Because I could not imagine the rise of this technology. I could also not imagine the fall of Kodak, the filmmaker, who wouldn't be able to make film any longer because there was a microchip. I wasn't able to imagine the end of newspapers, which we're seeing slowly here. There's so much I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine that any of the things that I'd grown up with that were so solid, so permanent, so eternal would go away. And yet, if I had done at that time what I was learning to do in philosophy and geopolitics, what I was studying, and look at patterns, I could see it, but I didn't. If you go back, and we can't go way back, to electricity, what did electricity do? It made it possible for cities to exist as industrial centers. Without electricity, without electric lights, you couldn't work at night. You could utilize that factory only during the day, and that poorly. Electricity made the Industrial Revolution possible. And when electricity was introduced, it was an extraordinary thing, and no one could imagine all the other things it would do, some of which you saw today in biology. It was unimaginable. It was what I would call a core technology. A core technology is one that branches and creates and transforms many times over. So that who would have imagined that you could drop something into someone's stomach, measure its acidity or whatever it was, using a form of electricity? These things were unimaginable, which is one of the deep failures of human beings. The deep failure of human beings is to fail to understand that that which is here now will not be here later, but something else will be here. So when we think about what electricity did, it transformed the night. The first thing it did is made it possible to have symphonies played on a cold night, having the railroad that was already invented bring you to the city, and you could go to London and listen to Mozart. The way in which technology wove itself together was extraordinary. You could also develop tools of war. You could create countries that were enormously powerful. You could change the world with that core technology. And everything is not a core technology. But electricity was. And it was invented long before Ben Franklin was fooling around with it. But it became an installed tool in the 1880s. In the 1880s, you began to have city lighting. It was not gas. An amazing thing. And this was everything you should invest in. And it gave you huge amounts of leisure time and also work time. And it was a wonderful thing that you saw in front of you. And by 1933, it was just one of those things. 1930 was about the time when all Euro-American cities had been electrified, almost all. And by then, it was just a normal part of your life that could never cease being important. And yet, it wasn't important. It was commonplace. It was natural. It was what you had. After a generation or two, you forget what you didn't have. Take a look at the automobile. In 1915, Henry Ford opened his factory. What Henry Ford did was not invent the car, but invent a car that you could afford. He also invented something else, very important in the United States, the dealership. Henry Ford didn't say, I'm going to go sell house to house of a car. I'm going to have a dealer, and he's going to fix the car because this thing is going to break. And he invented the entire cycle of an automobile. And those things are extraordinary, and the first people who had them were groundbreakers, transforming the world. And it transformed the world because you were now able to live 30, 40 miles away from the city, from the factory in which you worked, the office in which you worked, and drive to work. Traffic exam or not, you didn't have them yet. And by 1965, 50 years after it was invented, it was a mature business. The car had automatic transmission. It had air conditioning. It had brakes that worked. A self-starter, you didn't have to crank it. It was done. And everybody imagined what else we could do with a car because they'd learned from electricity. You could do things. And there was an idea, why don't we have a car that flew? This sounds demented now, and it was demented then. But it didn't sound demented because there was a belief we could push this technology ad infinitum. But at the same time, we had the aircraft, which began with the internal combustion engine that the car began with, okay? And we could get to Europe in 12 hours. We Americans measure it by getting to Europe. I don't know why. We measure it by getting to Europe. In 12 hours, we could fly here. And then a jet came, the 707. And we pushed it. We had to have the Concorde to get to London in 2.5 hours. And nobody bought it. Because the difference between 6 hours and 2.5 hours really wasn't worth the money, and we weren't going to buy it. See, every time you have a core technology, you begin by not being able to imagine what it can do. And then you think you can imagine it transforming everything forever. You could change everything from that technology. And then that technology becomes normal. It becomes mature. When I was growing up, the cool thing was the car. All the cool guys, myself not included, but I pretended, all the cool guys knew how to fix a car, and all the cool guys knew how to race one. This was in the States. You guys may have not done it, but we did. Almost killed ourselves, too. That was cool. Somebody who would be sitting in front of a computer screen playing a video game would not be cool. He would not get dates, I assure you. I didn't get dates either, but I was at least cool. So where we were 50 years after the car was invented is that it achieved its end. It had come to, not that it wouldn't be useful for a long, long time, not that you would be buying them, not that they wouldn't matter, not that you wouldn't use electricity. No. You all would be there. But the tremendous changes in society that it wrought had taken place. There are many other things that would happen, but they had changed. The automobile changed the landscape of our cities, the landscape of our countries, particularly in the United States. It made, in this vast country, it possible to go anywhere. And that was done. And it was good. And then it didn't matter. So in 1972, I picked up something containing a microchip, which I had read something about. It was an integrated circuit. I wasn't sure what else it did. But it could run a calculator. And I said, who cares? I can still add on my fingers. There are mechanical calculators that I could use. Why would I buy this? Because I didn't see what was inherent in that microchip. I didn't see an iPhone with a GPS system, an iPhone with its own camera. By the way, I told my wife when the camera was introduced, who would want a phone with a camera? So I'm not good at this game. She still irritates me by taking pictures. And number 3, the ability to take a phone call anywhere you are. That came from the microchip. Our ability to recall data, I won't say information, data, which is a lesser thing, on our computers, the things that we were able to do. And we entered the place where the microchip would be internal. It would continue transforming our lives forever. So the message I am giving you, the microchip is 50 years old. It was like an automobile in 1965. It was like electricity in 1930. It is not useless. Many excellent things will derive from it, but it will not change the pattern of your lives the way it has. You will dream of Concords, it's now called 5G. I still am not clear what 5G does. I've had a team research it and they can't figure out what it does, but it's going to be very good, which is very much what the Concorde was, or anything else. We see the signs of the decline of the radicalism of the microchip when we take a look at the question of productivity growth. Ever since the early 2000s, one of those, productivity worldwide has been declining. During the 1990s, really to around 2005, it surged. Why did it surge? It surged because the microchipped culture of technology made things possible. When I started my work, I used a typewriter. I wrote my dissertation on a typewriter. Do you know how demented that is? Because you're going to make mistakes. And your professor doesn't want mistakes. So you hire somebody, it was a woman always in those days, and she knew how not to make mistakes. But I didn't imagine a place with a spell check built in. None of these things were. How much did it change the way our offices worked, how our car repairs worked, how our management of the electrical grid, except in California, how that worked? It changed everything. They merged together. But what was not happening any longer and hasn't happened is the kind of numbers of growth, productivity growth, that we've seen before. Now, where are we at this point? We're at the point we were about 1930 or about 1965. Now, if you remember the 1970s, or the Great Depression, which we all had, it was intimately connected to the decline of productivity, plus a lot of other things. But the decline of productivity was critical because technologies come along in gaps. Okay? people were working on electricity with a fantastic passion, leaving the world quite open to Henry Ford and Daimler-Benz and everyone else. And now they are with the same absolute passion working on microchip-based technology. Something new and extraordinary will be made. Many new things. Many extraordinary. But the radical improvement in productivity, you can only get that when it's brand new, just maturing, transforming. Which would mean that, well, we got a kind of bad decade coming. But the truth is, this is the cycle. When I say geopolitics is about patterns, there's a pattern built into technology, and I vastly oversimplified it. So anybody who disagrees with me, I would have said what you thought I should say anyway. We vastly oversimplify it, but there's a pattern to technological growth, including the gap. And the gap consists of the time in which we cannot imagine this thing ever being anything other than the most fantastic thing the world has ever seen. Be it the auto, be it the railroad, be it... We can't imagine it. But more than that, the best minds are off looking for the next big thing. But most of our best minds are off trying to push this technology one step further, one step further, one step further, until they get a Concorde. So the real question that faces us today is, we see the global system shifting, and we see it partly because of technology. And what do we see? When I talk about the iPhone, every component in it was invented by the American Defense Department. The camera was invented by the National Reconnaissance Office. The cell phone was developed by the US Army as a mode of communication. GPS was designed for missiles. The microchip was invented by the US government for a submarine-launched ballistic missile that needed a lightweight system, and then for the F-14 fire. And the internet was invented, as we all know, by Al Gore. And if not Al Gore, certainly by DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. So when I talk about technology and I say great power builds great technology, it is also highly vulnerable to powers with technology. Whether it's the British steamship or steel rather than bronze sword, it doesn't matter. Technology matters. When you say, is America losing it? The great European wish. The fact of the matter is, well, we're now at the juncture. We invented electricity. We invented the automobile dealership. We invented the microchip. Now, what is the next thing that is coming? Because the one thing you can be certain of, it is coming, you will not expect it, and it'll be utterly different than what came before. The microchip was not connected to the internal combustion engine. The internal combustion engine had nothing to do with electrical generation. Each one sequentially came and transformed the world. And other things too that too short to mention. What is the next thing coming? Who would have thought that Microsoft, Bill Gates, coming up with the idea of putting an operating system on a disk and selling it to other computer manufacturers and not making hardware, was a genius. At the time, he looked like an idiot. And this is the problem we face. I could not recognize that in my hands, in 1972, that Hewlett-Packard was the future, that it would change everything. And I'm not stupid. Well, sometimes I'm stupid, but sometimes I'm not. I looked at it and I said, this is nice. Okay. So I Don't think that Edison imagined what he was going to do with the electrical AC current. I'm not sure what they thought, but it doesn't matter because history decides what's true. Not all the voters, not public opinion, not even the New York Times. This is sinful to say in America. None of these do. It is the thing that drives power one step further. Is the thing that gives nations power and security and leverage and control. And if we look at many of the dimensions of American power's growth, it was these things, these technologies. The battleground in geopolitics, therefore, is the next technology. The old one is gone. It's in the hands of the others. What comes after this decade-long pause that is going to be the next technology? I'm here to tell you that I haven't the slightest idea. But after it's invented, I will tell you I always knew it. Why? That's my job. We don't know what it is the point. But this we can be sure of. The digital world, like all other great inventions, will be here. It is an integral part of what we do. But the great multiples, you won't see them. The great growth in productivity, you've seen. There'll be many new things coming, I'm sure. We saw so many of them. But history tells us, and this is where it comes into geopolitics, that the power of nations is intimately linked to technology, and technology has a ruthless pattern of its own, and that is intellectual. When a really smart guy who can't get a date says, I'm not interested in digital anything anymore, this is old, and starts to think about the next thing. This could be also a woman. I'm just an old guy, so I think these terms. There's no reason it can't be a woman. And I'll just say that my daughter is an intelligence officer in the U.S. Army, so don't pick on me. Point I'm making is we don't know what's coming. It will be coming if you create the atmosphere for that guy, that gal, to say the incredible. Digital has matured. The great things are elsewhere now. And if you can say that, you can make the history. But if you're sitting there playing with cars and racing them and trying to fix them, well, Bill Gates and Jobs are sitting there building PCs. And Andy Groves is building Intel and everything else. As that's happening, if you're going to be sitting back here believing this will never end, you've missed it. On that incredibly depressing note, good night.